They laughed when I dropped out of Arak. Not smirks. Real laughter. The kind that fills a room, bounces off the walls, and leaves an aftertaste. They said I couldn't handle the pressure, couldn't take the orders, the drills, the grit. My own sister Mallory called me civilian material like it was a slur. At family dinners, they toasted her medals, and I became ambient noise, unseen, unspoken, unnecessary. Even after I enlisted quietly, no ceremony, they still saw me as a fluke, a misfire. She's just playing soldier, they said, like it was a game I'd eventually lose interest in. I didn't explain. I didn't correct them. I disappeared. And then one day, I stood in the training yard of a base that didn't exist on public maps. Dirt on my boots. A 5-star rank in my pocket. I watched Mallory drill a fresh batch of recruits. She looked right through me until her sergeant leaned in, eyes wide, and whispered, "General, ma'am." The silence that followed was sharp enough to bleed. For the first time, she saw me. Not as the dropout, not as the disappointment, but as someone she'd never taken the time to ask about. She didn't know the years I served under false names, the missions no one would ever declassify, the scars that don't show up in X-rays, and now she had to salute me. But that's not where the real story begins. Hi, I'm Belle Huxley. I've stayed silent for years about where I went, what I did, and why I walked away from everything I once called family. But today, I'm ready to speak. The message came through like an old habit I hadn't kicked short, sharp and cold. Come for all party, don't dress weird. 5 words from my mother. No punctuation, no warmth, no curiosity about where I'd been for nearly a decade. Just a summons, as if I were still 17 and living under her roof, as if I still owed them attendance. I stared at the screen for a full minute before locking it. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted to drive in the opposite direction to somewhere nameless and quiet. But another part, deeper, older, wanted to walk through that door and look them all in the eye. So I went. It was just past sunset when I pulled into the gravel driveway. Everything was the same, too much the same. The porch light still flickered like a nervous tick. The Huxley mailbox still leaned slightly left like my father's tired political views. The air smelled faintly of pine needles, engine oil, and a life I no longer belonged to. Inside the house was dressed like a military awards banquet. Red, white, blue banners. Folded programs with Mallory's name printed in cursive. A hand-painted sign strung above the table. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Mallory." Even the centerpiece was shaped like a miniature battlefield. It felt like walking into a shrine dedicated to someone else's mythology. No one looked up when I entered. Not Mallory. Not Dad. Not even the dog who'd died 8 years ago and apparently hadn't been replaced. I stood in the doorway like a ghost they all refused to admit had once lived here. I wore a plain gray shirt. No decorations, no insignia, no hint of the stars that lay hidden in my coat's lining. I didn't come to impress them. I came to remember who I was before they wrote me out of the story. Dad was the first to acknowledge me with the emotional range of a traffic report. "So, what are you doing these days?" he asked, already turning back to Mallory before I opened my mouth. I didn't answer. Why bother? Aunt Kendra, halfway through her second glass of wine, tilted her head like a cat studying roadkill. "Didn't you used to pretend to be a waitress?" she said, chuckling. "Guess you went pro, huh?" I smiled, not with kindness. "I'm better at performing," now I replied, tone flat as a scalpel. The kind of smile you only feel later deep in the bone. The first toast went to Mallory, then the second, then the third. Her medals gleamed under the chandelier like they had their own spotlight. No one noticed I didn't have a chair. Every seat had a name card except mine. Eventually, my mother glanced at me like she was seeing a stranger on her lawn. "Oh, right, you can sit by the grill. There's a folding chair on the porch." So I did. Outside, Spokane's air had that thin, sharp cold that slides into your sleeves. I sat alone beside the propane tank, listening to laughter through the window. Watching them raise glasses. Watching them forget I existed. And then, like a ghost, tapping its fingers on my shoulder, the vibration came. A device hidden deep in my coat hummed once, soft but urgent. I tapped the screen. One line of encrypted code slid across it. Report to Fort Irwin. Observer assignment. Security Council oversight. I stared at it for a beat, then smiled genuinely for the first time that night. Not because of the mission, because of the timing. I slipped the device back into its hidden pocket and glanced at the family photo hanging by the fireplace. Mallory in her dress uniform. My parents beaming. Not a single photo of me. But that was fine, because someday when the truth came out, when the people who dismissed me had to bow their heads and call me by my true title, every frame in this house would have to be rearranged, whether they liked it or not. Dawn peeled open over the Mojave like a blade against the horizon, thin, gold, and deliberate. The desert didn't wake gently. It rose with grit in its lungs and boots hitting packed dirt in perfect time. At Fort Irwin, the rhythm was relentless. Cadence calls cracked the air like whip cracks. Drill instructors moved like predators, and formations snapped into place like a choreography of obedience. I arrived under the radar as usual, my vehicle unmarked, my jacket pressed, my presence unannounced. The badge clipped to my lapel was deliberately nondescript civilian visitor. No rank, no unit, just a string of encrypted numbers that meant something only to those high enough to be afraid of them. This wasn't about making an entrance. It was about watching who noticed me anyway. I settled in the second row of the guest bleachers behind a pair of civilian contractors debating protein ratios and a base admin clerk impatiently tapping her stylus. None of them knew what I was or what I had come to see. Out on the field, Mallory's unit stood like statues under the sun, rifles gripped, faces tight with determination and sweat. Drill Sergeant Jason Bruckner stalked their line with his signature fury-barking orders that punched through the stillness like mortar fire. I remembered him well. He once chewed out a lieutenant colonel so thoroughly the man requested reassignment to Antarctica. And then mid-stride, he stopped. He scanned the bleachers and locked eyes with me. There was no hesitation, no confusion, just recognition, a shift of muscle, a breath held. Then Bruckner pivoted and marched toward me, not with curiosity, but with purpose. The chatter in the bleachers died. Recruits subtly broke form, eyes tracking him like they were waiting for blood. But when he reached me, there was no outburst, no reprimand, just a salute. Clean, sharp, immediate. "General Huxley, ma'am," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "I wasn't informed you'd be observing." Time stopped. The recruits froze mid-breath. The admin beside me stiffened. Even the desert air paused. I returned the faintest nod. "I'm off duty," I said quietly. "Keep this between us, Sergeant." He understood. Of course he did. Men like Bruckner didn't rise through bark alone. They survived by knowing when to speak and when to let silence carry weight. He turned without another word and resumed formation. But the ripple had already begun. On the field, Mallory was still staring at me. Her rifle lay at her feet, forgotten. She hadn't moved since she heard Bruckner say my name. The name she'd spent years pretending not to know anymore. A recruit near her leaned in, whispering with disbelief, "Wait, your sister's a general?" Mallory didn't answer. She didn't even blink, because her world built on medals, merit, and carefully curated superiority had just cracked at the seams. I stayed only as long as protocol allowed, then slipped out the side gate. No one followed. No one called after me. But behind me, the story was already rewriting itself. The rumors would spread like fire. The ghost in the bleachers. The woman no one recognized until the toughest drill sergeant on base saluted her like she commanded the entire war. And Mallory. She was no longer just the star cadet. She was the sister of a classified shadow. It happened at 3:47 a.m., that silent, suspended hour where even shadows hesitate to move. The secure line on my wrist buzzed once sharp and deliberate. Not a ringtone, not a message. Just a pulse like a warning shot from a weapon, only I knew how to load. I hadn't been sleeping. Fort Irwin's guest suite was dark, sterile, forgettable. But my body had been restless since the moment Mallory dropped her rifle on the training field. Something had shifted then. The past doesn't knock, it breaks in. I retrieved the encrypted receiver and tapped the screen. A single phrase blinked back at me, red and pulsing like a wound. Unauthorized access internal node profile, Huxley Alpha. My blood turned to stone. That tag was mine, or had been burned and buried years ago when I left fieldwork and slipped into the deeper shadows. That profile should have been dead, irrecoverable. Yet here it was, live again. I moved quickly, the motion automatic, years of instinct overriding fear. I opened a trace diagnostic. The source wasn't external. It wasn't a hack. It came from inside the base. Worse, it came from a location tied to my old deployment drives. Sloppy encryption. Not a pro, but familiar enough to sting. And then I remembered. The duffel bag. Last year. The handoff to Mallory. She thought it was nothing. I'd let her think that. I was wrong. The drive she found was one I'd used on Operation Thornlight, custom-built, shadow-encoded, loaded with fragments of a system I never wanted touched again. It was meant to stay dormant, but she had opened it, and by doing so, she'd stepped onto a pressure plate. It had triggered Alderson React. Not a file, not a report. A black ops project designed to vanish everything it touched, including the people who came too close. She had no idea what she was waking up. And now, my digital signature was all over it. Not hers. Mine. I should have flagged her, reported the breach, handed her over to military intelligence, and walked away clean. But I didn't. Instead, I dug deeper. The access trail wasn't natural. The breadcrumb path she followed, the folders, the timing, it was too perfect, too staged. Like someone wanted her to find it, and that's when I understood. This wasn't an accident. It was bait. And my sister, curious, stubborn, and desperate to understand, the sister she never really knew, had bitten. The virus she triggered wasn't designed to expose her. It was meant to expose me. Someone out there had been waiting for the match to strike. Now the fire had begun, and they were hoping it would burn me to ash. Dawn had barely risen over Fort Irwin when I made my way back through the side gate. The base was waking boots on gravel, low murmurs in mess halls, but I moved like a ghost. My badge, once my cloak, now felt like a spotlight. Inside the sterile corridors, I was unranked, unseen. But I carried the weight of 10 years in my shoulders. I passed the drill field. On it, recruits snapped to attention as orders cut through the cold air. At the center stood Drill Sergeant Jason Bruckner, his posture rigid as steel. But his sharp eyes scanned the crowd. They always did. I stepped into his line of sight, and his gaze flicked, registered, then locked. The ripple started again, whispers sliding across ranks, cadets straightening, searching for a name they barely dared to speak. It was time. I approached Bruckner with purpose. He didn't salute, he didn't soften, but he stepped aside an opening in the line. I walked into the field. Silence fell, a physical thing I could feel in my bones. 50 soldiers, athletes turned warriors, all tensing. They didn't know why I was there, but they could sense something fundamental had just shifted. I raised my hand, recalling the older podcasts I'd made in the field. Not for glory, but for clarity. Soldiers' attention. Their heads snapped up eyes, drilling into me. Mine were steady burning with every story they hadn't heard. My name is Belle Huxley, General Huxley. Some faces betrayed surprise, others hardened, ready to test me. That's fine. I was ready. You've been drilled. You've been graded. You've been measured. Now I'm here to see who you are when nobody's measuring. I waited. Bruckner remained silent, still lined up like a soldier himself, awaiting orders. I know each of you is stronger than your uniform. Your uniform doesn't make you. Your choices do. Your words, your covenants to each other, and your conviction, those make you. There was a shift in the wind. A young corporal, barely out of cadet blue, stepped forward and saluted. Bruckner barked back at attention. Request permission to speak, ma'am. Permission granted. The corporal's voice didn't waver. Ma'am, we heard someone entered the system last night with clearance code, Huxley Alpha. We didn't know who. We didn't know why. I let the sentence hang. Cadets looked left and right. Some faces were pale. I nodded slowly. You did what you were trained to do. You followed protocol. You reported it. That's what integrity looks like. A ripple of exhalation moved through the group. Bruckner remained poised, but I saw it in his stance: approval, pride, an unspoken telling that I had just given them something more valuable than medals. I stepped forward. Tell me what happens next. The corporal hesitated. We lock it down, ma'am. We follow the chain. We wait for your orders. I paused to let her words settle. Then open every channel. Go beyond protocol. Don't just report and wait, investigate. Uncover, question, understand. Murmurs spread. Bruckner nodded once. I continued. This breach, this isn't about lines of code or clearance levels. It's about trust. Between you and each other. Between you and your country. I looked each one in the eye. You have the power to keep something buried, or to bring it to light. A moment of silence. Then, with perfect synchronicity, Bruckner shouted, Forward march. The recruits snapped to life, ready to attack the obstacle course. I stepped off the field, my steps measured. Bruckner walked beside me now, unspoken affirmation. In the bleachers, I caught a glimpse of Mallory. Her rifle was back in hand, her jaw set. But when she saw me, really saw me, her gaze softened. Something behind her eyes shifted. I didn't acknowledge her then. Protocol facade, all that remained. But inside, something clenched and released. I'd given them more than orders. I'd given them a reason. Bruckner leaned in quietly. You've changed the field, General. I nodded. We change it every day. But this matters. He understood. I turned toward the base command building, toward logs, files, questions, and something deeper, toward a reckoning we would face not just as soldiers, but as siblings. It was supposed to be routine, a system ping a minor flag in the network's daily sweep. But the moment I saw the access node, my blood ran cold. The breach hadn't come from outside the wire, not from a foreign actor or rogue satellite. It had come from inside Fort Irwin. And worse, it bore a signature I recognized intimately. Mine. Not my current clearance, but an old digital profile. A ghost of the soldier I used to be, buried and sealed behind layers of classified credentials and shadow archives. Huxley Alpha. That tag was supposed to be dormant, erased, replaced with newer, more sterile titles. I opened the trace logs with hands that moved faster than thought. The access path led to a familiar encryption string, sloppy, incomplete, something that hadn't been used properly in years. But the fingerprint, I knew it like a scar. It was a device I'd assigned during a field simulation. One that was never meant to be reactivated. One I thought I'd lost until I remembered the duffel. The one I gave Mallory. The realization hit like a rifle stock to the chest. She'd found it, opened it, triggered something she didn't understand. And now, the system didn't see her, it saw me. My clearance, my digital identity, my past. The protocol was clear. I should have reported it, flagged her immediately. An unauthorized access of that depth could be considered espionage, even treason. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I shut down the external alerts and pulled every trace log into an offline buffer. I isolated the data and rebuilt the breach path second by second. What I saw made my gut twist. The sequence of folders opened the rate of exploration. It wasn't random. It was almost guided. No cadet would have known to dig that deep, which meant someone wanted her to find it. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a trap. Someone had been waiting for a breach, waiting for someone to touch a buried clearance and accidentally bring an old ghost back to life. And Mallory, curious, proud, hungry for understanding, had stepped right into it. But it wouldn't be her name on the tribunal docket. It would be mine. I stared at the access screen, the blinking cursor frozen at the end of a command that should never have been executed. Behind it lay classified projects, forgotten missions, black op failures that had never been declassified, and one name written all over them: Huxley. No, I wouldn't let this happen. I didn't disappear a decade ago just to be pulled into the light by a mistake wrapped in sisterhood. If I wanted to survive this, I had to find out who set the trap and why they wanted me exposed. Morning filtered through the blackout curtains of the Fort Irwin guest suite, casting a pale glow over the edge of the console screen. The trace logs blinked steadily, persistently, an electronic heartbeat refusing to be ignored. What began as a minor system alert now screamed in silence across my screen. Access detected. Internal node. Clearance tag, Huxley Alpha. My lungs froze. My name, my past, just triggered every silent alarm I'd spent years trying to bury. The tag belonged to me. Not the present-day Bell Huxley General Observer strategist, but the ghost of who I was years ago. A digital identity from an era no longer on record. That access profile had been purged, incinerated, buried beneath false identities and obfuscated operations. And now it was alive again. I moved fast, navigating through encrypted diagnostics, rerouting data into a private buffer. No external alerts, not yet. I needed to understand what had been touched and by whom before the storm exploded above my head. The access path was messy, not professional, not clean. But the direction it took too precise, like someone following a set of coordinates they didn't know were coordinates. Someone guided, someone baited, someone who shouldn't have had access. Then it clicked. The duffel. 6 months ago, I'd passed it off to Mallory without ceremony. Told her it was just gear spare clothes, old field scraps. But tucked inside had been a legacy drive. One I thought lost. One I never meant to leave in anyone's hands, least of all hers. She found it. She activated it, and she had no idea what she'd awakened. The drive had been preloaded with ghost architecture traces of an old project codenamed Alderson React. Not a file, not a mission log, a protocol, a digital kill switch that never made it past prototype. Its very existence had been classified above most Black Ops layers. It had been my work, my risk, my shadow. Now it had been touched, and the system thought it was me. According to official logs, I had just breached the defense network using a clearance tag long declared extinct. The implications were nuclear espionage, treason, immediate suspension of rank. Even the hint of my involvement would trigger a tribunal. I stared at the screen, at the blinking prompt that pulsed like a wound. One wrong move, and the entire house of cards would collapse, not just on me, but on every operation I'd touched in the last decade. I should have flagged it, should have reported Mallory, should have saved myself, but I didn't. Instead, I started tracing the sequence of access click by click, folder by folder. And what I saw didn't look like curiosity. It looked like a trail, like someone had intentionally left this path for her to follow. No cadet should have gotten that deep, unless someone wanted her to, and she'd stepped into it wide-eyed and unaware, thinking she was pulling a thread that belonged to me. But she hadn't tugged at my past. She'd pulled the pin from a grenade aimed directly at me. This wasn't an accident. This was a trap. And whoever had set it knew I'd cover for her. The question was who I initiated a secure back channel and messaged Bruckner. Trusted, efficient, apolitical. One of the few people left in uniform who didn't play games. I sent him a short string of code, followed by a directive, Huxley Alpha reactivated. Silence protocol, begin internal scrape. I didn't wait for confirmation. Bruckner never answered messages. He responded with actions. Within minutes, I saw the terminal lights in the external monitoring suite blink. He was already on it. Somewhere in the base, Mallory moved. I didn't see her, but I felt her presence like pressure on my chest. She didn't know what she'd done. Not yet. And maybe I didn't want her to, because if she knew, she'd have to choose stand beside me in the fire or become another witness against me. I stood at the window eyes, tracing the drill field, watching cadets move in rhythmic patterns below. None of them knew that a war had just started, one without gunfire, one fought in shadows and silence. A war with no medals, just consequences. I turned back to the console, staring at my name on the breach report. Someone had waited years to drag me back into the light, and they'd used my sister to do it. Now I had two choices: run the investigation like a ghost, or become the target they hoped I'd be. Fort Irwin's forensics lab was the only place quieter than a battlefield. After the final shot, a place where every sound mattered. The fluorescent lights cast long, sterile shadows, and the hum of servers sounded like whispers of secrets, too dangerous to speak aloud. I stood alone at Terminal 3, cursor blinking eyes, scanning trace logs that glimmered like headlines I wasn't ready to read. I had provisional clearance not because they trusted me, but because protocol forced their hand. The access code, Huxley Alpha, had breached the system, and now I wore suspicion like a uniform. Footsteps approached. Drill Sergeant Bruckner appeared at my side, his presence as solid as armor, silent, but unyielding. He slid a black data drive across the counter. No explanation. Just delivery. I plugged it in. Instantly, files streamed in trace logs, encryption headers, fragmentary chatter from old mission endpoints. I zoomed through them, heart pounding. This wasn't amateur work, I whispered, voice tight. Not probes, abattage. This was intentional. Bruckner nodded. You asking? I met his gaze. This script, it's dated, time-stamped nearly exactly 5 years ago. He stepped closer, eyes scanning the code hidden behind layers of obfuscation. Before you left for training school, I swallowed. Exactly. Right after Candor. He let the name hang. The fallout from that mission had left ash in its wake. Enough to destroy reputations. Enough to blast anyone who tried to speak out. He who put this here waited a long time, I said. My fingers shook slightly as I scrolled deeper. Someone wanted it buried until the exact moment they could bring it back with full force. Bruckner's jaw clenched as he absorbed every line. So they pulled the trigger tonight. Maybe. I paused, mind racing. But there's more. The encryption signature layers, key distribution padding, it matches someone from Candor. Bruckner's jaw tightened further. Croft, I didn't hesitate. Nathan Croft, Operation Candor's XO. He went still. He disappeared after the mission. They reassigned him. But intel says he was never cleared, kept in dark duty. Maybe he resurfaced. A silence followed, thick as smoke. Then I spoke again, quietly, carefully. If Croft set this up, he's playing a long game. He knew someone would eventually find the drive. And he knew I would protect that sister of mine. Bruckner nodded, his usual wall of stoicism cracking. He knew your heart better than you did. I took a breath. Madam of calculation, but heart still quaking. I'm bringing Mallory in. I met his eyes. She touched the device. She found his trap, but she didn't know. I need her here. I need to see what she saw. Bruckner leaned back. You sure that's wise? Too late. My voice was steady. Time's past the point of no return. We need her. We also need to shield her. If this blows, she's collateral. He folded his arms. She'll crack. I shook my head. Not like this. Not with me. Not when she hears who said it. He watched me, half respect flickering in his eyes. Okay, but you lead. I paused. Then with deliberate calm, I activated an internal secure channel and typed my message, Mallory Huxley, to forensics. Room 14. Immediate. Maintain secure. The room's silence widened. Outside, the soft stomping of recruits echoed like a warning drum. I looked back at the console. Let's do this, I said. Bruckner didn't speak. He simply nodded, then stepped away to pull encrypted files and lock down perimeter protocols. 10 minutes later, Mallory walked in. Uniform, crisp, eyes sharp. She looked at me first, then at Bruckner. Her hand went to the drive. I stayed silent. Let her small gasp flash of recognition fill the room. Let her claws of confusion dig in. We need to talk, I said. My voice was low measured. But first know that I didn't report you. I shielded you. Her eyes flickered. Relief, betrayal, I couldn't tell. Why, she asked. Because you didn't do anything wrong. She looked at the black drive on display like an accusation. You opened it, I prompted. She nodded. No words. I moved closer and pointed to the logs on the screen. It wasn't curiosity. Someone left a script here. 5 years dormant, and it was his signature, Croft's. She stepped back, breath catching. Croft. Her name became a whisper of memory. I think he set this as bait for me, I said. He expected me to cover for you. And when you triggered the access, he'd use that trail to pin me with treason. Her eyes dilated with dawning comprehension. He wants you out in the open. I turned to Bruckner. Run me everything on Croft. Tracking IP logs, past transcripts, anything. Bruckner typed, quietly agreeing. You want me to find him? Yes, and make sure he can't take us with him. Mallory folded her arms, face hardening. She stepped closer, standing where the three of us formed a line of purpose. The cameras overhead buzzed unconsciously. The room held our silence, and in that hush, our alliance formed. This changes everything, she said, voice firm. Then we adapt, I replied. A new mission began, one not from base command, one with no medals, no orders, only our code, protect each other, expose him, survive. The clock on the wall ticked on. The hum of the servers pulsed beneath our feet. Our war was only starting. We became a covert cell inside Fort Irwin, 3 people bound by truth and danger. Bruckner watched perimeter logs while Mallory and I cracked Croft's digital footprint. Every timestamp, proxy, and server bounce brought us deeper into a world he no longer existed in, yet somehow still controlled. I opened our first compiled trace and archived chat log from 2 years ago, showing Croft communicating clandestinely with an off-base contractor, a civilian AI consultant whose presence was irregular but not alarming. Until now. He's been here, I told Mallory, under our noses. Her jaw clenched. As a civilian, Using his cover to stay close, Bruckner's nod was grim. He logged in through civilian IP system protocols. It's advanced. He ghost-hopped around internal firewalls. I tapped my fingertip against the screen. A cluster of access attempts dated 6 months ago, right after the anniversary of Candor. This wasn't a sudden reactivation. It was a reboot. A reboot planned long ago, lying in wait like a ticking bomb. We traced Croft's civilian contractor identity, alias Nathan Stanton, registered to a tactical AI simulation hub 2 miles from the main base. A facility mostly unmonitored where recruits could simulate drone strikes. Innocuous until you realized it formed the perfect blind spot. Bruckner pulled up the civilian's personnel file. Empty. No clearance, no audit log, not even a local badge record. He had assumed civilian, never official. Bruckner, I said softly. He's been collecting data. Seeds for this trap. Seeds for a warhead he could trigger now. Outside, the evening drill faded. The lab lights hummed brighter. Everything felt sharper in them, our lines, our breaths, our resolve. Mallory leaned forward, eyes wide. He's here, but off-grid, operating under the radar. Exactly, I said. He has access to the same system through civilian backdoors. He can activate scripts remotely. And he wants me exposed. She swallowed, hard silence hanging. Then she said, "So what do we do, General?" I caught her eye. "We ghost hunt." Bruckner raised an eyebrow. "You mean break into his place?" She flinched, but I nodded. "Yes, we'll get a warrant later. But right now, we need live intel, physical, undeniable. We need the source, his gear, his logs. If he's setting off Alderson React, we need proof." There was a solemn weight to the plan. One wrong step, and we'd be labeled deserters, intelligence absconders. But the system was already off kilter. Mallory hesitated, then exhaled. "I'm in." "Me too," Bruckner confirmed. The steel in his tone was final. Night fell as we assembled a stripped-down team, myself, Bruckner, Mallory, and 2 trusted intel techs in full civilian garb, one to handle comms, one to run diagnostics. We took a black base vehicle, windows tinted, no plates. Each person carried a silenced sidearm and encrypted tablets. We arrived at Stanton's civilian contractor facility, an old warehouse that doubled as a VR sim shed. The perimeter was unguarded. Cameras trained inward. No sign-in kiosk. Just a wooden door with a keypad, a shed next to it labeled TASI AI Systems, and faint hum of servers inside. I pressed my hand to the door's keypad, housing dust, catching on my fingertips. My breath echoed in my ears. I felt the ghosts of drills past, wanting to speak through the walls. I tapped the code sequence, one provided by Bruckner, pulled from the contractor's dark access logs. The door clicked. Inside, the space was surreal, black net curtains converging above VR towers, tangled wires, and drones hanging like defunct cicadas. Server racks, humming spines of LEDs. And there, at the far end, a workstation. Dual monitors, glowing blue lines of code streaming upward. No one in sight. But the systems were active, a heartbeat resisted. Mallory crouched beside me. "He's not here, but he's been here recently." We found coffee cups in varying warmness. A jacket hung on a hook, stamped with Stanton's civilian ID, that same picture-faced alias he'd used. Buttons on the keyboard still hot. Bruckner slipped around the back. He spotted Croft's configuration drive, a labeled USB stuck into a router. He yanked it and handed it to me. My fingers closed around it like a talisman. Then the lights flickered. The servers whined. Alarms changed pitch. The facility didn't lock down. It released. A back door exploded open behind us. A silhouette materialized. Croft, fresh beard, wire glasses, grin like a curse. "Miss me," he said. His voice was calm, cold, as if I'd met him only minutes ago. I stepped forward without hesitation. Bruckner and Mallory flanked me. The techs went silent. He scanned our formation. "Ah, the ghost general, the prodigal sister, the soldier dog." Impressive. My heart thudded, danger ignited. The servers whined again, lines of code screeched upward. Shut it down, I said quietly to Bruckner. He yanked power cables. Lights stuttered. Servers hummed down. Blue screens flickered to black. Croft clapped slowly. Good, we can talk in the dark. He stepped forward. I noticed his hands were empty, no gun, only calm. At last he said, "We meet." He glanced at the USB in my hand. "You took my gift?" I looked him directly in the eye. "You set the bait." We stepped in. His grin curved. "And you followed the route I laid 10 years ago." He reached behind his neck and pulled a lanyard from under his collar. An ID badge, N, Stanton Civilian Consultant TAC AI Systems. This badge gave me everything he said, and yet it didn't matter. Not for you. I swallowed. "What do you want?" He shook his head, amusement in his tone. "I want you to fall. I want the system to burn you. I want Fort Irwin to recall you from the edge of control. But I also want something else." He leaned closer. "The world needs to see what shadows do, how power can hide behind a name that died long ago." Mallory's voice cut in. "You used my sister to pull this." Croft didn't respond. He just smiled tighter. She was the perfect key. Time stood still. Sirens blared outside Fort Irwin's perimeter had responded. The trap had sprung. Bruckner crouched half cover. I stepped forward. "This ends now." Croft's expression sharpened. He raised an open hand not to strike, to present a second USB. "In there is the archive. The world's going to need to know the full story of Candor, who died, who bled, who covered it up. You know that, right?" Mahler's breath caught, the echo of ghosts from her sister's past. I held my ground. "We'll decide what goes public." He exhaled slow. "Let's make a deal." The door behind us swung open. Armed base security filled the frame. Cameras stared down. Commands buzzed through comms. In the quiet that followed, 3 figures stood among dead servers and humming neon ghosts. The general, her sister, and the man who'd laid their lives bare. The war, a different kind of war, had begun. The squad of armed base security flooded in, eyes trained on my form. Bruckner stood slightly ahead, shielding my sister, my silent squad, following with the weight of trust. In the back, Croft stood still, a peeled-off grin still on his face. "You brought the cavalry," he observed, voice soaked in irony. "What's next, a court-martial?" I stepped forward through static, light heart pounding quietly. "Stand down," I said, not to them, but to the trap still hidden in Croft's eyes. Security separated around us. Gun barrels lowered, but stayed ready. Sensors hummed with panic mode beeps. I felt the walls closing in lines blurring. Croft's grin didn't waver. He raised the second USB, half-hearted offer, half-steel trap. "You took my bait," he said. "Now I'll take mine back. 2 drives, one with evidence of Alderson React, one with classified intel on Op Candor. I want them both released to public channels." Silence ate the room. Even guards froze. I searched his eyes. Croft wasn't bluffing. Not anymore. I looked at Bruckner. He understood. One wrong move and the fallout would bury us all. I turned slowly to Croft. "We need a deal." He nodded. Once a puppet master pleased, I played along. "Base Command will host joint review," I said, voice steely. "We release Alderson React logs to oversight. We agree to a declassification window. All evidence, all names, Candor included." Croft's hand twitched. "No leaks, no delays. 24 hours," Bruckner added, scanning corridors. "Then you answer questions." "Unfiltered." "Fine," Croft said. He tossed the second USB into my hand. I caught it. Cold, heavy, proof. Then I tossed it into the metal tray held by security. A wager laid down, a shield drawn. Somewhere, Mallory inhaled. She stepped forward, joining the triangle of leaders. I looked at her, a silent vow. Together we'd restore more than our names. We'd fix what was broken. Then I turned purposefully to Croft. Downgrade your demands. Full military tribunal public seat. No cherry picking, or this goes nowhere. He hesitated, eyes flickered. Then his grin fractured. Deal, he said, voice tight. The silence that followed was heavy but precise, methodical. A pause before the storm. Security cuffed him. Bruckner took position. Cameras swiveled and captured. Live. I watched Mallory's face shine with resolve. Croft's eyes sought mine before he was led away. Me, I kept the final victory hidden behind silence. Because what we just built wasn't cover-up, it was countermeasure. The final gambit, and perhaps for the first time in years, a chance to walk back into the light, unbroken together. 3 days after the raid, the military press room at Fort Irwin was packed a mix of uniformed officers, civilian analysts, and camera crews from major networks. The air buzzed, not with drill commands, but with anticipation. A hush fell as I walked to the podium, Mallory at my side, Bruckner, watching from the back like a silent anchor. I wore my dress blues, crisp buttoned but empty of medals. The one distinction I carried earlier was left behind. I didn't need it now. I cleared my throat. Thank you for coming, I began. My voice was steady, measured. 3 years ago, a classified program, Alderson React, was initiated under my command. Its purpose was strictly defensive, but recent events revealed it was never forgotten. It lay dormant in old digital frameworks until it was purposefully triggered. I paused, scanning the rows of faces. Due to an act of unintended access, we have uncovered evidence of malicious intent from someone once within our ranks. That individual, Nathan Stanton, formerly Lieutenant Croft, has been apprehended and placed under custody. An internal review has begun. Flashbulbs popped. Mallory shifted but stayed brave. I carried on. There is more. Operation Candor. My voice tightened, was a tactical mission that became one of the darkest chapters in our division's history. It involved civilian casualties, and I remained silent because I believed it was the right decision at the time. Tonight, I no longer do. Murmurs ran through the audience. Observers leaned forward. I am submitting the full case file for declassification. All missions, all files, names, dates, decisions will be placed before a joint military tribunal, followed by public release after legal redaction. We owe that much to the people we serve. One reporter raised her hand. I acknowledged her. General, many are saying this is unprecedented, publicly revealing classified operations. Why now? I looked directly at her. Because when shadows become bait, silence becomes complicity. The trust of this nation depends not on perfection, but on accountability. We can't be silent anymore. Another question, will other names be implicated? Yes, I nodded. There will be more names. Officers, cadets, possibly civilians. But full transparency will determine accountability. I stepped back as Bruckner came up beside Mallory. He placed a hand on her shoulder, solid, supportive. Together, we faced the media. For the next 45 minutes, cameras rolled. Questions fired. Our line never wavered. We did not defend. We did not hide. We revealed. When the press conference ended, I felt the weight of thousands of eyes releasing its pressure. Mallory and I shared a silent look. She squeezed my hand. I didn't choke. Not yet. Later in my private office, the glow of the monitors turned the night into a confession booth. Mallory studied the files on her screen. I sat opposite her, leaned against the desk, headset muted. How do we move forward? She asked, voice quiet, raw. I exhaled. One mission at a time. One truth at a time. She closed the documents and stood. She reached out, took my hand. We're in this together, she said. No shadows left. I nodded. No more shadows. Outside, Fort Irwin's gates were quiet again. The sun was setting soft orange streaks across the base. Within it, a new dawn had started. We were still military, still duty-bound, still faced with mistakes. But for the first time, something else mattered too. Truth over pride, integrity over illusion, family under fire surviving, and that we'd carry forward. The first morning after the press conference, Fort Irwin was still noisy, but without the pressure music. Everyone came to work with something not fear, but curiosity. Lieutenants were eagerly asking each other, what was the reaction of General Huxley's family? When would the public see the candor documents? But no one expected anything but the truth. I said a brief hello to Mallory at the training ground. No need for a confession, just a slight nod. She understood from now on there would be no more sister-brother distinction in the dark, but two comrades standing shoulder to shoulder in public. Soon, we stood before the courtroom of the Joint Military Commission. Officials, journalists, survivors of opulent candor, they were all present. Across the street, Nathan Stanton, formerly Croft, was being led to the witness stand. He no longer had the confident smile of the day, just a hard, exhausted face. The panel roared in hoarse tones. General Huxley, your truth is the foundation of justice. Please speak first. I took a breath, tapping my fingers on the podium. I do not seek glory. I seek truth. I cover up not for fame, but for responsibility to the lives that are still alive. My voice was steady, far-reaching. Each sentence struck the minds and hearts of those listening. When I mentioned Mallory, I felt a lump in my throat. She is innocent. She is the reason I remained silent when it was easier to speak. And today, she makes me prouder than any star in the military. Mallory looked up at the panel, her eyes no longer fearful, but proud. I am General Huxley's sister, she said, her voice clear and firm. And I will always be by his side through all trials. The truth about candor must be heard, and I will speak. The hall was silent. The harsh indictments were read out of crimes committed in the civilian net of cover-ups of abandoned underground networks. Stanton's eyes flickered to the charge sheet, his lips quivering as he heard his name in the confessions of his former comrades. When the trial ended, the verdict was in Stanton was sentenced to 25 years. The candor papers were declassified, revealing the full extent of the crimes and cover-ups. Next month, the campaign maps the casualty lists. Everything would become reference material for the Strategic Academy. On the afternoon of the sentencing, Mallory and I walked along the old route I'd run during training. The air was quiet, save for the steady click of our sandals. Then she held out a small box containing the Phoenix Command logo, a silver badge without a medal, like a relic we'd both kept. For you, she said, so you won't forget why you stepped into the darkness. I took it from her, my eyes following the badge glinting in the afternoon sun. We will not lose our way, I replied. The principles will still follow us. The next day, the first induction ceremony at the National Security Academy took place. On the stage below were new faces, young officers, brand new cadets, and Mallory in the observer ranks. I stepped up to the podium wearing the Phoenix badge that was still in the pocket on my left breast. There was no traditional salute. I simply said, when power obscures truth, the first duty of those in power is to open the door. The screen behind me zoomed in, and a video from my previous academic career played when I held the microphone in front of the soldiers, smiling and saying just one short sentence. Wait. Then I stopped looking down. There were emotional, tearful eyes all around, and the military castle fell silent for a long, stifling moment. It was not a symbol of power. It was a symbol of choice, daring to wait for the right moment to save lives and save one's soul. That is the legacy that Mallory and I entrust to the future. After the public trial, life at Fort Irwin didn't return to normal. It went into a different normal. The truth had been revealed, trust had been rebuilt, but the damage had been done. Now, there were no more doubts, but new questions. The first morning after the sentencing, Mallory and I walked around the perimeter of the drill yard, not to inspect the troops, but to talk frankly. No flattery, no distance, just the sound of footsteps and synchronized breathing. "I'm creating an internal transparency program," I said, "to help cadets learn how to respond when they see something wrong, even if speaking up might change their lives." Mallory smiled solemnly. "You're going to lead that program?" "No," I admitted. "You're the right person." My voice was husky knowledge and responsibility combined. Transparency shouldn't start with the rank of officer. It should be taught as a citizen. The next day, the base held its first workshop, Leadership and Integrity in the Gray Zone. Young officers, lieutenants, and cadets filed into the conference room clutching thick files bearing the Silver Phoenix logo, a symbol of no medals, no flash, just values and commitment. Mallory stood at the podium in front of more than 100 people. I stood to her left, assisting with the first slide steps for handling unusual access internal reporting procedures. Specific examples from the recent scandal, but presented like industry case studies, clear, factual, not fictional. Her voice was steady, her words polite but determined. "Silence is complicity, but the choice to not speak up, sometimes the power of that silence is stronger when it is used properly," she explained. All eyes were on her, not because of her high rank, but because every word she spoke had been through pain and trials, and so reached the listener. When she finished, I continued, "Just a few minutes. The most important thing in a transparent system is the responsibility of each individual. Not, there is a process, but what will I do if I see the process is not correct?" After the workshop, the cadets gathered in groups chatting. A young female lieutenant came up looking at us with wide eyes. I think this is more worthwhile than any training we have ever had." I laughed out loud. Mallory patted her on the shoulder. "We need more people like you." The following month, the official report of the Strategic Review Committee was released, and there was a section devoted to the internal censorship system proposed by the two sisters. It was even included in the National Military Textbook. The Phoenix became a symbol of the door to truth, not as flashy as a medal, but enough to change the way people looked at military justice. That afternoon, I walked into a small conference room in the command building. People were waiting for me, the Joint CIA officer, the Department of Defense representative, and a senior reporter from the Washington Times. They asked me, "Are you willing to join the National Transparency Oversight Council?" I looked them in the eye, my heart quiet enough to decline. I think the person who will do the most for that milestone is the one who has suffered the most for hiding it. I glanced to the side where no one spoke. Mallory. They understood. The final chapter of the day was the Phoenix pinning ceremony, which took place on the training ground. The guests, senior officers, and cadets lined up. Mallory and I prepared to stand side by side, not looking at the medal nor at our superiors. I took the silver badge, a phoenix rising from the ashes. No motto, just a symbol of the movement from silence to transparency. Colonel Clark stepped forward, presenting the badge to Mallory first for courage, for discerning right from wrong. The yard was silent. Then he turned to me, "General Huxley, for your persistence in finding the truth, for defending the honor of the organization, and for rebuilding trust on behalf of the coalition, I hereby award you the Phoenix Badge." Everyone applauded slowly but sincerely. I bowed my head in thanks. Mallory met me the same slight nod. I returned it with a wordless smile. That night in the base lounge, I sat across from the photograph of the first Phoenix team in their worn uniforms, the same one I had kept in my luggage. It hung proudly now. The golden light fell on our faces. Mallory sat down beside her. "We did it," she said. I gave her the big sister look exactly. The two sisters sat in silence for a moment of pure silence. No speech, no flash. Just the first half-asleep line. We saved the rest of it and ourselves.